After what has felt like an eternity of waiting, we have finally gotten our grubby little mitts on Elden Ring, the latest game from Dark Souls developer From Software. Unlike many of the studio's previous outings, Elden Ring can be a mysterious, difficult and slightly obtuse mistress, especially on a first playthrough. Luckily, we've already spent tens of hours in Elden Ring working out its intricacies to provide you with a ton of tips to get you started on your journey into the lands between. Whether you're new to From Software games or just need a few tips and tricks to make things a little easier in this challenging game, fear not, we've got you covered. Here's 7 tips to make you a pro, or at least get you started, in Elden Ring. If, like us, you normally play through the Dark Souls games with nothing but a sword, a shield and your wits about you, it can be all too easy to jump into Elden Ring and stick to what you know. However, in doing so, you'd be missing out on some of the coolest abilities in the game. Magic is so fun to play around with in Elden Ring, whether you're using sorceries to summon giant spectral bows or casting incantations to channel the wrath of a dragon. Throughout the game, you'll regularly be rewarded with sorceries and incantations, and it'd be a waste to never use them. However, in an open world the size of the lands between, you could play for a dozen hours without finding the equipment that allows you to cast these spells. Weapons like swords and spears are more easily found and purchased, but staffs and seals are harder to come by. Because of that, we recommend starting as one of the classes that comes already equipped with these items: the Astrologer or the Prisoner for sorcery, or the Prophet and Confessor for incantations. Sorcery is your classic blue ethereal magic, while incantations dabble with golden holy damage and dragon fire. Even if you don't want to go full magic, it can be a little tough to get used to at first. Running some useful spells alongside your regular build is definitely worth it. Oh, and if you've already started as a different class and want to start using magic before you've beaten the first major boss of the game at Stormveil Castle, don't worry, we've got you covered there too. If you want a good early staff, you can travel south from Limgrave and beat a mini-boss located in the demi-human forest ruins, located here on your map. Oh, and remember that weird fog door that you couldn't get past in the Stranded Graveyard, right at the beginning of the game? Well, if you collect 2 stone sword keys, you can unlock that door and find a strong seal here. The enemies are a little tough, and there's a horrible grinding machine thing running rampant around there, but if you can make your way through the dungeon, you'll find a powerful seal to cast incantations with. Finally, if you're further in the game and regretting your choice of build, magic or not, Elden Ring does let you completely respec your stats multiple times after beating the second major boss, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. You'll need to spend an item called a larval tear to do so, but there's multiple to be found in the game. We've already collected 3 so far, so you'll have more than one chance to completely change your attributes if you fancy mixing things up. Your map is your best friend in Elden Ring, but when you first start the game, there's barely a single detail on it, beyond the hint of a few of the main roads. Study this blank canvas carefully, however, and you'll see small archstone-shaped symbols, barely visible unless you zoom in. These symbols are more important than you might think. These are the locations you'll find the all-important map fragments. Upon collecting one, the map of your current location will suddenly spring to life. Unlike other open world titles, however, you won't suddenly have a ton of objective markers to go to. Instead, the map is full of little interesting oddities. The outlines of buildings and ruins, which will normally always contain some kind of treasure. Maybe a strange telescope symbol, which gives you a bird's eye view of the world. Or even a drawing of one of Elden Ring's minor Erd trees off in the distance. Because of this, the map is absolutely key to your exploration in the game, so discovering the map fragments early on in an area is ideal. Keep an eye out for those little archstone-like symbols, and once you've unlocked the map, make a note of some of the strange looking areas you want to visit. You can even use the map itself to check for pathways and hills when you're struggling to work out how to get up into a high area. Or, alternatively, keep an eye out for those strange gravestones jutting out of cliff sides. They show up on your map and they allow you to safely jump down steep cliffs, one stone at a time on your mount. When you visit important places like ruins, towns or minor Erd trees, they'll be marked on your map for future reference, but the NPCs, enemies and resources that reside within them aren't noted down. Because of that, you'll also want to take advantage of the map's marker system, which lets you place up to 100 little stamps down, all different symbols, to help you keep track of everything in this big open world. And speaking of keeping track, Here's one tip I wish someone had given me when I started playing Elden Ring. Take notes. Whether you go retro and whip out a pen and some paper, or start whacking bullet points in a Google Doc on your phone, you're going to want to make sure to jot down any important information you're given, even if it doesn't seem all that relevant at the time. Like the Dark Souls games before it, Elden Ring does not keep track of your quests, and it's all too easy to lose track of who you're meant to visit, or what item you're meant to deliver in one of the game's side quests. You'll want to keep track of the names of different NPCs, as well as their locations on the map, and definitely note down when someone mentions a character you've not run into yet. You might expect to remember such details, but 20 hours later, when you do run into an NPC with a name you recognise, it can be really difficult to recall why. The entire game has this wonderful sense of exploration, and these quests, few and far between as they are, all help build upon that, so make sure you write things down so that you don't get too lost along the way. Oh, and make sure to read the item descriptions of things you pick up as well. Again, it's easy to forget when you've picked up an important item or miss it entirely, especially if you're in battle or if you're just passing through. If you've played a game in the Dark Souls series before, Elden Ring's combat will feel very familiar. A shield in your left hand, a sword in your right, and maybe some magic along the way. You can parry enemies to open them up for a satisfying riposte, dealing big damage, and you can sneak behind them for a backstab. So far, so familiar. One of the new wrinkles to combat in Elden Ring, however, is almost invisible and easily forgotten beyond some early tutorials. This is stance breaking, and it can give players a huge advantage in combat, especially against the many tough bosses of the game. While there's no way of knowing how many hits it will take to break the stance of each enemy in the game, there's no bar to tell you what their stance and what their poise is like, we've yet to find a foe who can't be whittled down enough to open them up for a big critical attack. What you will want to know, however, are the best ways to quickly break your enemy's stance. Frequent regular attacks will begin to break it down, but charged heavy attacks and jumping heavy attacks will do a much larger amount of stance damage. And then there's the guard counter, performed by using a strong attack right after you block an attack with your shield or weapon. This does huge stance damage, and combining all these will quickly whittle an opponent's stance down. Outside of these fundamentals, many of the weapon abilities you can switch between in the game, known as Ashes of War, can also quickly break an enemy's stance. The Glint Blade Phalanx Ash of War, for example, sends 4 spectral daggers towards an enemy and can instantly break the stance of some weaker foes. Spells and incantations can also break your enemy's stance, and you want to mix and match to see what works best for you. However, your opponent's stance will build back up invisibly over time, so you'll need to keep attacking frequently and aggressively if you want to get multiple opportunities for a critical hit, especially on a boss. Just be careful though, you can also have your own stance broken by your enemies, opening you up for a critical attack. You can make this more difficult for them by increasing your poise stat. You can see this go up or down when you equip different armour and weapons in the menu. Whenever a new From Software game releases, it always sparks the exact same debate. Should these games offer a difficulty mode? We're not going to get into the ins and outs of whether Dark Souls is actually difficult, but regardless of whether you find them challenging or not, one thing is true. Some people do get really stuck on the boss fights. We are some of those people. Whether we've gone in accidentally underleveled or the stress of the fight causes us to mess up. We've spent plenty of time hitting our heads against brick walls in Dark Souls, Bloodborne and Sekiro. In Elden Ring, there's no real need to do that anymore. In fact, the best course of action is normally always to leave and come back later. Even before you've beaten the very first boss of the game, who blocks the critical path and a big part of the map, there's a huge amount of the world available to explore. And in doing so, in going off to explore, you'll likely collect more runes to help you level up, more weapons and the resources to upgrade them, as well as new abilities or spells. Nowhere is this clearer than with Margit the Fell Omen, the boss guarding the entrance to Stormvale Castle. Margit is one of the tougher bosses in the game, especially for new players still getting to grips with the mechanics. However, should you leave and begin exploring the rest of Limgrave, let's say the valley that runs north from Agheel Lake, for no reason in particular, you might happen upon a boss fight with a familiar foe. No spoilers, but you'll know who we're talking about when you meet them. As long as you don't deplete their entire health bar, they'll surrender and then sell you an item called Margit's Shackles. This can be used to make the fight against Margit the Fell Omen easier. This is the most direct demonstration of the value of walking away from a tricky boss fight, but it's almost always the best course of action. Take advantage of Elden Ring's huge open world, have fun exploring, and try not to spend too long bashing your head against a brick wall. In the early stages of Elden Ring, it can feel as if the game is being a little stingy with your healing flasks, and it's difficult to know how you're meant to improve them. The first thing you're going to want to do, however, is find your third flask. While you're given the Flask of Crimson Tears and the Flask of Cerulean Tears in the first moments of Elden Ring, it's all too easy to miss out on the Flask of Wondrous Physic. To get this peculiar beverage, follow the path east from the Gatefront Ruins in Limgrave, one of the first locations you'll like to find, especially if you followed our map advice earlier, and then north at the fork in the path. You'll eventually come across the third church of Marika, where you can grab your flask. Like your other tipples, the Flask of Wondrous Physic replenishes whenever you rest at a Site of Grace, but its effect can be customised to your liking with Crystal Tears. You'll find one of these at the church too, essentially giving you an extra healing item, but more can be found at the minor Erd trees scattered across the map, and they can do anything from boosting stamina recovery to creating an entire Bubba shield around your character. As for your other two flasks, there are two special types of item found in the Lands Between, which can be used to upgrade them at a Site of Grace. Golden seeds can be found at small illusory trees around the world of Elden Ring, and increase the number of flasks you can use. Luckily, these are most often found, or at least visible, alongside main roads and major locations in the open world, so you should be able to come across these fairly naturally as you progress. The other items, Sacred Tears, can be found within the few churches dotted around the map, and increase the potency of each flask's healing. Like the illusory trees, these churches are rarely found too far from the game's major roads and paths, and contain a distinctive statue. Keep your eyes peeled for these and you'll be swigging dozens of health and FP restoring flasks before you know it. Our final tip is short and sweet. Have fun and play around. Elden Ring has so many different items, weapons, spells, monsters, bosses and secrets to discover, and it's a far less challenging game than titles like Bloodborne or Sekiro. Rather than just finding a loadout that works and sticking with it, try out different weapons and playstyles. Dig out a bow and arrow every now and again, or experiment with new weapons or weaker enemies by travelling back to the game's early areas. You can look for secrets you missed the first time around while grinding some extra runes for levelling. Purchase as many recipe books as you can at the game's merchants in order to unlock new items that you can craft in the item crafting menu, and they can help you in battle. Stop to explore that weird looking shack just off the road, even if you'd planned on following the critical path. Elden Ring is not a gauntlet to be completed in a specific order. It's an open world, full of possibilities and discovery. So take your time, have fun, and let yourself get lost in the Lands Between. You won't regret it. So, those were our 7 tips to help you make the most of your time in Elden Ring. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and give the video a like to let us know you enjoyed it. Oh, and you can put some of your own top tips in the comments down below. Bye!